For a long time, I believed silence was the cost of belonging. Every cruel joke, every twisted rumor, I swallowed it with a polite smile. I told myself that keeping quiet was how families survived. But that illusion shattered one evening when my stepmother leaned across the dinner table, smirked, and sneered that someone like me couldn't afford to wear something like that, her fingers reaching for the small pin fastened near my collarbone. The last thing my real mother ever left behind. Something inside me shut down completely. My name is Elena Ward, and I've spent years earning respect in places where compassion is often mistaken for weakness. That night, clarity finally arrived. Silence wasn't harmony, it was surrender, and I decided I was finished surrendering, no matter who it unsettled. I remember the smell before anything else. Not baked desserts or candles, but a sharp, overpowering perfume that had no place in my father's home. It clung to the walls, heavy and artificial, replacing the familiar mix of sea air and machine oil I'd grown up with. The house felt foreign. The dining table glittered under excessive crystal glasses, and a banner stretched across the wall read, "Happy Birthday, Thomas." Most of the guests barely knew my father beyond polite greetings. They belonged to Marion's world. Perfect hair, loud laughs, and conversations that never allowed silence. My father sat quietly at the end of the table, smiling in that distant way people do when they wish they could vanish. Marion drifted between her guests like she was hosting a gala, laughter ringing higher than the background music. When she introduced me, it was with a careless flick of her hand. "This is Elena, my husband's daughter," she said. "She works for a federal office. Something involving former service members, I think." A few nods, no interest. Their attention snapped immediately to Lucas, her son, who was loudly boasting about a startup that sounded more speculative than successful. I poured drinks, cleared plates, perfected the role of the invisible daughter. Once my father caught my eye. There was an apology buried in his look. Marion noticed and tightened her grip on his shoulder during her toast. "To family," she said brightly, as if she owned the word. Glasses clinked. When the guests finally left, I stood at the sink washing dishes while she hovered nearby. "You still use those military discounts?" she asked sweetly. "Such a clever way to stretch your budget." I said nothing. My father didn't either. Some silences have lived too long to die easily. Later, the coastal wind followed me home. My phone buzzed. An email from the National Service Honors Office. I opened it slowly. Official recognition invitation. For several seconds, I simply breathed. Relief, disbelief, pride tangled together. Then a quieter realization settled in. Not everyone would be pleased. A week later, I returned for dinner, hoping something might feel different. It didn't. Marion had gathered her usual circle of Savannah socialites, women soaked in perfume and self-congratulation. Crystal glasses sparkled. Laughter echoed, hollow and rehearsed. I sat at the far end of the table, half guest, half exhibit. They discussed resort shares, renovation costs, and husbands who still looked decent in linen suits. When the topic turned to children, Marion practically glowed. "My Lucas just launched his own software firm," she announced proudly, swirling her wine. "He's brilliant with finances." Then came the pause, the afterthought, and Elena, she added softly, "she's reliable, government work, very stable." The word stable landed like pity. The women smiled politely. Conversation moved on. Someone asked what I did before I could answer. Marion did it for me. "Administrative work for veterans," she said. "Very noble." Moments later, they were discussing handbags. After dinner, I stepped outside, desperate for air that didn't smell like pretense. Through the window, I saw Marion leaning toward one of her friends. "That medal thing she's getting," she whispered. "It's not a big deal. They give those out constantly." The friend giggled. My father stood nearby, frozen mid-step, his shoulders tensed. Then he turned away, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. That was always his way. Gentle, exhausted, afraid of confrontation. I drove home with their laughter lodged deep in my chest. Years of service, years of sacrifice, and in that house, I was still nothing more than a footnote rewritten by someone else's vanity. 2 nights later, I opened the cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. It had traveled with me from base housing to rented apartments, still smelling faintly of salt and old letters. Beneath folded photos lay a small velvet case. Inside was my mother's search and rescue insignia, golden, worn smooth, shaped like a falcon in flight. She wore it on her final mission over the North Atlantic. She never returned. I traced the engraving with my thumb, Atlantic Sector 2001. It wasn't jewelry. It was proof that women like her, like me, had served, endured, and been conveniently forgotten. The next day, Marianne arrived unannounced as usual. Her gaze locked onto the insignia resting on the table, eyes narrowing before her smile appeared. "That's pretty," she said lightly. "Where did it come from?" "My mother," I replied. She tilted her head. "You might want to be careful wearing that to the ceremony. People could think it's fake gold. You wouldn't want to look showy." I almost laughed. "I'm not wearing it for anyone else," I said. "Then why wear it at all?" "Because it's mine." Her smile cracked. Just for a second, but I saw it. That night, I pressed my uniform carefully, placing the insignia beside it. My mother's voice surfaced in memory. "Respect isn't given by rank. It's earned by how you stand." I didn't yet know how much that belief would be tested. The following morning, Marianne announced she'd attend the ceremony as family support. My father nodded, grateful. I said nothing, only rested my palm over the insignia. Before leaving, she posted online, "So proud of our Elena for her little recognition next week. Family matters." The word "our" burned worse than any insult. The spark had been lit. I just didn't yet know how large the fire would grow. The sound of heels and hushed conversations echoed beneath the museum's high arches. I recognized colleagues in the crowd, calm expressions, quiet pride, applauding steadily as names were announced. When mine was called, I stepped forward, spine straight, breath even. Then it happened, a sharp tug, then another. The weight against my chest disappeared. Marianne's voice cut through the microphone, loud enough to slice the air. "You're too poor to be wearing that. It's fake." The hall froze, cameras snapped. Gasps rippled through the room. My body locked in place as disbelief flared into heat beneath my skin. She yanked again. The pin tore through the fabric of my uniform, scraping painfully against my chest. I staggered back, hands trembling. Then a voice rose from the audience, saged, steady, impossible to ignore. "Ma'am, that isn't jewelry. That's a maritime rescue insignia from the North Atlantic operation in 2001. I was there when her mother earned it." Silence crashed down so hard it almost hurt. A man stepped forward, leaning on a cane that tapped softly against the floor. His chest was lined with ribbons worn by time, not pride. Captain Harold Whitmore, retired Navy, stood tall despite his years. He looked at Marianne, not with anger, but with something far worse, disappointment. "Do you have any idea who she is?" he asked calmly. "She's the daughter of a rescuer, and she has served this country longer than your cruelty has waited for attention." Marianne stood frozen, her hands suspended midair, color draining from her face. My father moved to my side, shaken, his voice barely audible. "Elena, I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I picked up the insignia and pinned it back onto my uniform. Crooked, torn fabric beneath it, but still holding. Unbroken, the ceremony continued, applause dull and distant. My heartbeat thundered louder than anything else. When it finally ended, I stepped outside into the sharp coastal wind, cool against burning skin. Captain Whitmore followed, his cane tapping softly on the stone. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said gently. "Old instincts." "You didn't," I replied. "You stood where no one else would." He smiled faintly. "Your mother saved lives that day. The least I could do was protect her memory." Then quietly, "Some people see metal and think it gives them value. Others see sacrifice and feel small." As he turned away, I glanced back through the glass. Marianne stood alone inside, surrounded by people who wouldn't meet her eyes. She reached for my father's arm. He didn't move, and in that still moment, something inside me cleared, like a sky after a storm. You can't reason with someone who fears you're worth more than their own failure. I touched the insignia, now warm against my skin, and whispered into the wind, "It's still mine." The video hit the internet before I reached home. Someone in the audience had recorded everything. The flash of Marianne's crimson dress, her hand tearing across my uniform, her voice cutting through the microphone like a blade. By morning, the clip had passed 300,000 views. The headline read, "Woman humiliates federal veteran at honors ceremony." The comments were merciless. Who raised her? That's why social climbers don't belong at service events. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I went to work, shook hands, and stayed silent. But silence was never Marian's strength. That afternoon, she posted her own version of events. A misunderstanding, she wrote. I was only trying to fix Elena's uniform. I would never disrespect a service member. The photo showed her smiling. Same red dress, same caption about family pride. The internet wasn't fooled. Her boutique's rating collapsed overnight. 2 local news stations requested interviews. I declined both. Marian didn't. She told reporters I had overreacted, that I'd turned a private moment into spectacle. Lucas joined in online, claiming I'd left service early because I couldn't handle pressure. By evening, strangers were debating my life like entertainment. My assistant peeked into my office. "Ma'am, do you want me to filter your emails?" "No," I said. "I know what to delete." That night, my father called. His voice sounded thinner than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to," I replied. "Just stop protecting her from it." A long silence followed, the kind that finally admits truth. "You're right," he whispered. "I should have drawn the line sooner. It's not too late." When we hung up, the quiet didn't feel like victory. It felt like relief, the kind that comes when a truth stops fighting to be buried. A few days later, a courier left an envelope at my door. Marian's handwriting, elegant, desperate. Inside was an apology tangled with excuses. Stress, media pressure, then the real ask. Maybe we could host a charity event together to rebuild her store's image. She wasn't sorry. She was recruiting me to clean her mess. That evening, I drove to the pier. The water was steel, gray, the wind sharp. I tore the letter into strips and dropped them into the tide. Ink bled fast, excuses dissolving into the sea. The ocean swallowed every lie she'd ever polished. The next morning, Dad called again. "I moved out," he said, "staying with an old Navy friend." Then softer, "I should have stood up for you sooner." "You just did." 2 days later, Marian posted a photo alone in her emptied boutique. Starting over, Savannah's polite circles turned their backs, not out of morals, but contagion. Shame spreads fastest when it's fashionable. That weekend, Dad and I met for coffee. We didn't say much. The silence between us finally felt whole. "You remind me of your mother," he said quietly, when she walked away from storms. No anger, just certainty. "She always said." I replied, "Sometimes you win by leaving first." As we left, a street musician played the national anthem on an old trumpet. The notes cracked, but never stopped, imperfect, persistent, beautiful, and in that sound I understood. Real strength isn't never breaking. It's breaking with dignity, and never begging to be repaired. Weeks passed, the noise faded, the ache remained. One morning before dawn, I made coffee and watched the harbor wake. I opened my laptop and wrote. Not defense, not revenge. Truth. I wrote about my mother. About honor that doesn't glitter. About veterans who return unseen. About women who serve and carry weight no one names. I ended with one line. Sometimes the people who mock your worth are terrified they have none. I sent it to Veterans Voice Journal. 2 days later, it ran on the front page. It spread faster than the scandal ever had. This time, the story wasn't about Marian. It was about every unseen woman who served. Fame has a long memory. Someone recognized her again. Sponsors pulled out. Clients vanished. One evening, she came to my door. No makeup, handshaking. "I came to apologize," she said. I was jealous. I felt no anger. "Only exhaustion. You don't need forgiveness." I told her, "Just live with it." After she left, I looked at my mother's insignia on the wall. For the first time in years, I felt still. A month later, Dad called again. "You should sit down," he said. "She's trying to sell my Navy memorabilia." He sent a link, an auction labeled Authentic Private Military Collection, his patches, his engraved lighter, a framed photo of him and my mother on the carrier deck. It wasn't greed anymore, it was desperation. I forwarded everything to the Veterans Historical Association. Within hours, the auction froze, reporters resurfaced, headlines followed. Disgraced boutique owner caught selling military memorabilia. When authorities arrived, she didn't fight. She just stood there hollow. She lost everything. Dad said quietly, "No." I replied, "She sold it herself." He moved back into his house soon after. The first thing we did was hang my mother's photo in the living room again. That night, I placed her insignia on the mantel beside it. The gold caught the lamplight, faint, steady, alive. For the first time in years, the house felt like home. 2 years later, the coast hadn't changed much, but I had. At the Atlantic Rescue Memorial, Dad and I stood as a new plaque was unveiled. I had donated my mother's insignia to the National Maritime Museum, where it now rested behind glass. Elena Ward Search and Rescue Division, North Atlantic, 2001. Captain Whitmore was there, frail but smiling. "Your mother saved lives," he said, "and you saved her story." As we walked toward the pier, Dad asked, "Ever hear from her?" "No," I said, "and that's fine. Forgiveness isn't letting them back in. It's setting them down." And at last I felt whole,